What's going on, everyone, and welcome into Plizone's podcast, filled to the brim with glitchy analysis and freezing cold takes, so cold that they're boiling hot. In this episode, we're going to continue our Big 12 preview and talk about the BYU Cougars. So let's go ahead and hop into the star players. On offense, LJ Martin. I think this guy has potential to be the main producer for the BYU Cougars this season. He had to split carries last year, but I think he's going to get the lion's share of the load this year. So I don't know about 1,000-yard back, but definitely if BYU's scoring points, it's going to be in the hands of LJ Martin on the ground or maybe getting some receptions. Now on the defensive side of the ball, Tyler Beatty, defensive end. I think he's a pretty good run stopper as well as good edge setter. So he's a guy to watch out for whenever BYU has to get a stop, especially on an outside zone or a power O play with some of these other Big 12 teams. Now, in the middle of this defense, you've got Ben Bywater, which I actually think is a pretty damn good linebacker. He is somebody to watch out for. Maybe not on your, awards watch list for like All-American or Best Linebacker or any of that, but when it comes to making a tackle, I think Ben Bywater can get the job done. Now let's get into a couple storylines. First up, we've got a major QB battle here. Jake Retzlaff, I believe is his name, versus Gary Bohannon, who is a transfer. Actually, both of these guys are transfers. Jake Retzlaff is from CC Riverside Community College, or Riverside Community College. I think that's right. And then I cannot remember where Gary Bohannon is from, but they both transfer in. They're dueling it out for the number one spot. If I had to guess, I would give the nod to Gary Bohannon. I've seen some good news about him in practice recently, and we're getting pretty close to the season, so BYU's got to name a starter, but what I do want to point out is we're probably going to see both of these guys on the field just because of the record prediction that I'll be talking about in just a little bit. Next storyline, BYU is returning most of their team. They always do a good job with retaining their talent. You really don't see that many players hitting the transfer portal and getting out of there. But at the same time, BYU does not really do that good of a job of bringing transfers in, especially from other FBS programs. And I think that's pretty evident when it comes to looking at their record over the next 5 years. They're going to see a lot of struggles, but they will be able to retain the talent on their team. Now let's go ahead and get into the key losses and additions for this BYU unit this year. On the losses side of things, Kingsley Suamatea, I believe, offensive tackle. It was a second-round pick this year in the draft. I thought that was a major loss, but the rest of this offensive line is returning, so that's a positive thing to think about. But massive loss there. And then on the addition side of things, we've got Jack Kelly, an edge rusher from Weber State. He had 8.5 sacks. And when you move up from the FCS level to the FBS level, I think that is a big jump. I'm not sure how much he can contribute here, but he is projected to be in the starting lineup. And if that's going to happen, I'm going to guess he's got to get at least 5 or 6 sacks for this BYU team. So he's a guy to look out for. Good addition, but the only one of note so far. Now let's talk about the last point that I want to get into before we get into the not sacred is the wrong word, beloved record prediction. BYU is now stuck. Entering into the Big 12 was really their only option. BYU was an independent program like a Notre Dame or a UMass or a UConn, but now they're in it. They're in the Big 12. They're getting a lot of money in a TV deal, which is great, but now they don't get to make their own schedule. They've been able to compete at a high level when they get to play like an Idaho State, a Weber State, every other game, but now you're stuck playing 9 conference games against some really good and talented teams. I don't know if they'll ever end up being good in this, but they didn't really have a choice is what I want to say. And that's where college football is at right now. And that's just not something that a lot of people think about when thinking about college football. You've got your Houstons, your BYUs. Eventually you're going to have your Tulanes, your Tulsas, and stuff like that. They're going to become cannon fodder for what the bigger battle is, and that's the Big Ten and the SEC duking it out for being the best conference in college football. Everything else in the main media's eyes doesn't matter, but hey, when you're on Plizone's podcast, we care about the little guy. We want to see all these smaller teams unite and create a good force, and that is what the Big 12 is doing by bringing in BYU, so we support that. But with a negative thought comes a positive thought. But this one is a negative thought. BYU record prediction 3-9. Unfortunately, we've got Southern Illinois to start off the season. They'll get a good home W, but then you go at SMU. Not a lot of people are talking about this SMU Mustangs team. Extremely talented offense there with Rhett Lashley as the head coach there. I'm a big fan of SMU, so that is a loss for BYU. At Wyoming, this game I will put on danger alert. You get a good Lee Corso, not so fast, my friend, but I will give BYU the edge. I don't think Wyoming is what they used to be, so that's 2-1 to start the year, but then 8 straight losses versus Kansas State, at Baylor, versus Arizona, versus Oklahoma State, at UCF, at Utah, versus Kansas, and then at Arizona State. There's only one game that I can see, maybe 2 games on this part of the schedule that I could see being competitive, and that's at Arizona State and at Baylor. But here's my thing. I'm a big believer in home field advantage, and when both of those teams have the home field advantage over BYU, I cannot in good conscience give BYU the W in either of those games. But they wrap it up with a home game against Houston, and I will give them that win. I think that honestly is not the worst outcome that I could see for BYU. I mean, they could be 1-11, but they have probably the 4th or 5th toughest schedule in the Big 12. They have a lack of a starting quarterback. I think I talked about how Gary Bohannon is probably going to be the starter, but we're going to see both of these quarterbacks here in this season, just because when you're 3-9 over the year, there's no way you just stick with one guy over and over and over again, especially in that 8-game losing streak. So we'll be seeing both quarterbacks. That's about it. I think that this BYU team is going to, again, retain most of their talent for next year. The problem is this is not Big 12 talent that we're seeing on this roster, and that's what they're going to have to flip and transfer to. So BYU 3-9. I don't see a lot of promise for them next year. That's going to do it for this episode. Be sure to tune in next week. We're going to talk about Baylor, Cincinnati, Colorado, Houston, Iowa State, Kansas State, all the Big 12 teams. So thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.